Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Matt. So, my name's Wade Roush. I am Chief Correspondent at Xconomy, and that's like economy, but with an X. I don't know if a lot of you have come across Xconomy, but we cover the startup world, we cover the mechanics of innovation, and we're interested in basically anything that's venture funded and anything that's high tech, but that includes, of course, food-related innovation. So we're increasingly trying to cover this whole space, what's going on with food entrepreneurs. I was here for the big food hackathon recently, and that was exciting, and it's a space we're going to keep covering. And this whole question of protein and where it comes from is one of my favorite sort of sub-questions under the food heading, because it's one that kind of cuts across every conceivable line. I mean, it seems like every cultural, political, social, religious, economic faction in the world has some kind of opinion about where we should get our protein. And so whenever you talk about changing where our protein comes from, it automatically sort of raises everyone's hackles and leads to an instant discussion about all of these sort of traditions and biases and beliefs, not just about nutrition, but about a lot of other things. So when you have a discussion about protein, I think it's interesting and fun because all those things are on the table. Obviously, tonight the question is, can you make sort of new businesses out of new sources of protein? So we've got an amazing panel tonight. We've got 2 investors and 3 entrepreneurs, all of whom have perspectives on the question. And the first thing we're going to do is basically just let each of them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they themselves came to be interested in food innovation and sort of what they're doing that relates to new and alternative sources of protein. And then we're going to have a little bit of discussion up here amongst the panel, and we'll be sure to leave plenty of time for Q&A from you guys at the end. Just as an FYI, I'm hoping to make a video and maybe publish it if it turns out well on Xconomy, so I might repeat some of your questions for the camera. And that's about it. So let's just dive in. Let's start with Gabby Lewis from XO. Tell us about what XO is and how you got interested in food and sort of what your mission is in 2 minutes or less.
Sure. So I'm Gabi Lewis, co-founder of XO, which makes protein bars from cricket flour, which is slow roasted and finely ground crickets. I first tried my first insights while traveling through Ecuador 4 years ago. Then went to Brown University to study economics. And while I was there, I got very interested in nutrition and never thought I'd combine all those things. Today, 4 years later, to create a protein bar that is very nutritious, very sustainable, and is really pushing forward this new protein source from insects.
Okay, that was perfect. All right, Dan.
Hi, so I'm Daniel Imrie-Situnayake, and I'm a co-founder of Tiny Farms. And what we're doing, like you probably noticed, more and more attention in the media is coming onto like this idea that we're going to be eating insects. But the supply really isn't there to meet demand yet. And so we're going to develop technologies and processes that will basically reduce the cost and increase the efficiency of producing insects at scale so that these guys can actually buy the protein they need to build their products.
Okay, that's perfect. Scott from Founders Fund.
Yep, I'm Scott Nolan from Founders Fund. I'm on the investment team there. I guess we're a VC. What we really try and do is invest in companies that are making transformational developments in technology and that are also building great business at the same time, preferably businesses that can become very large monopolies. So that's kind of the framing of everything that we put in as monopolies and really cool tech. So you know, we originally got interested in this space. If you look at the math over like the next 10, 20 years, there are a lot of people coming into the middle class. They want to eat more meat. We only have so much arable land. If you do the math, something's got to give. So looking for cool solutions in this space.
Just looking at this point, or do you have any investments?
We have one investment in Hampton Creek.
Oh, Hampton Creek, okay.
And yeah, actively looking.
Okay, cool.
Amol Deshpande. I work at Kleiner Perkins as a partner. I focus on food and agriculture. My background is in agriculture. I've loved it my whole life. I worked at Cargill and was an ag entrepreneur before that. We're interested in fundamental technical innovations that can change the way agriculture is done. And as it relates to protein, my goal is to fundamentally change the way humans consume protein because the animal model is inefficient and it really has to change. And that's based on the fact that if you were going to design a process to deliver protein to humans from scratch, you definitely would use an animal. We have the technology now to do it.
And you guys are invested in Beyond Meat.
And we have others in the food and agricultural space, but they're not yet publicly known.
Okay, so we can expect more news on that front. All right, awesome. Josh.
I'm Josh Tetrick, the founder and CEO of Hampton Creek. And like Amol and these guys, when we look at it, the food system, we think it's entirely broken. In one area of the food system that we think really has all of the characteristics of a particularly broken system is the egg industry, which is the industry that we're going after. Astoundingly, 1.8 trillion eggs are laid every year around the world, and 99% of those eggs come from places that if we all saw them with our own two eyes would probably make us want to vomit. Unsafe, inhumane, incredibly unsustainable. We think if we were starting it from scratch today, there's no way in hell we would do it like this, so we take the animal, the feed, the cages out of the equation and replace it with a plant.
Okay, so eggs are broken.
Extremely.
All right. So I guess I want to start with a question about protein in general. So you guys are here to represent and talk about plant sources of protein and insect sources of protein. But I'm sure that everyone this week also was following the news, and this isn't new, but there were some new kind of publications this week about just a new publicity stunts, to be frank, to do with stem cell derived meat. So basically beef stem cells cultured in petri dishes to the point where they are something resembling hamburger. So I mean, there's still this possibility on the table of animal meat sort of grown in laboratories, which would theoretically not have the sort of same ethical implications of livestock-derived meat. So I wanted to ask you guys, to basically make your argument for why it matters where we get our protein. Like, why does it matter? So just put it on the table. I mean, I don't want to answer it for you. Answer it for me.
I think it matters because as human beings that are concerned about the world, there are a lot of urgent needs out there and things that pop into my mind. We have 67 million kids without an education. We have 1 billion people who go to bed hungry every single night. We have 77 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions dumped in our atmosphere, and lots of animals suffering from inhumane and cruel punishment and pandemic issues. And food is connected to a lot of these different issues. In a lot of ways, I think it's the node in the network to these various sorts of needs that we have. And animal protein in particular, which is our focus in sort of disrupting that system, is responsible, at least the traditional, the conventional way of manufacturing animal protein. And I think it matters because it's connected. It matters because solving it helps to solve a lot of these other problems too.
What's the actual source for the protein that you guys are using in the egg substitute?
So we've identified 11 different plants that one way or another can achieve the functionality of an egg in various products, including as a scrambled egg. We use everything from a particular type of pea to a particular species of sorghum to beans that are native to South Asia.
Okay, and not to be contrary, but are you sure that the carbon footprint of all of these 11 plants is actually smaller than the carbon footprint of a poultry farm or an egg farm?
Yeah, so pretty sure, and it's kind of sort of basic logic as to why. When you have, in the world of eggs, you have a hen with 8 other hens in a cage, and for about 2 years that hen is fed massive amounts of soy and massive amounts of corn. It requires a whole lot of land and water and fertilizer, which requires a lot of oil. And when you need all of these inputs in order to produce an egg that goes in a cookie that we eat, you have a really inefficient, really carbon-intensive product, and it's just much easier when you can just grow the damn thing.
Okay. Who else wants to jump in on this question of why it matters where we get our protein?
So I can go. I mean, who here tried some form of insect protein today? Put your hand up. Pretty much everyone. Good job there. We're seeing more and more of that as we go. And who eats
But it
beef?
tastes like peanut brittle, okay, so...
Well, exactly. I mean, who eats beef? Put your hand up. Who eats like protein that comes from vegetables? And like, who doesn't eat beef?
Doesn't eat?
Yeah. So, like, that is why we need a variety of different protein sources, because, like, people have different requirements individually, like, because of health, because of their morals, because of their tastes. And we're never going to have a world where we're all relying on one source of protein. Even so, we've kind of gone down that path, especially in the West. We rely heavily on this like meat production industry that's sort of existed since industrialization. And like, I think it's just starting to dawn on us that really we need to be open to eating other forms of protein too. And also they're tasty and delicious and like easy to ship and store as well. So it doesn't make sense to pick one. There's no winner, and there's a huge market for food. So.
Gabby, is your perspective on insect protein pretty much the same that
Yeah, definitely.
as an alternative?
Of course, I don't choose to eat fish or beef. In the same way, I don't think insect protein is versus another kind of protein. Our perspective is that there's this irrational disgust, but it's very real, which is why we're initially creating a protein powder. You would never know there are actually insects in there, and combining it with very natural ingredients to create a delicious and healthy initial product to introduce this idea of insect protein.
So you guys, the investors on the panel, do you feel that you can afford to have sort of an opinion about where our protein should come from, or are you more interested in solely kind of the business aspects of how to make the food economy work better?
I think you do need to have a view on both the business and where it should come from.
Okay.
I think the other angle on this question that we've been talking about, obviously there's a need for new protein sources. I think the reason that this week's developments actually matter and that the stem cell derived beef product is actually important because you want to answer how big an impact can this actually have. And the beef industry is here. You know, we're in San Francisco, people eat lots of different sources of protein. Most of the country, people eat a lot of beef. And so if you want to have a massive impact, you have to think about how mainstream can this get. And so I think, you know, things like beef substitutes are also really important in addition to other protein sources.
Right. Michelle asked us to make sure that we're all speaking up so people way at the back can hear us. So, Amol, do you have a...
Yeah, I have an opinion on it.
Yeah.
I think the use of animals for protein is absurd. And when I worked at Cargill, it made it clear to me how absurd it actually is. If you were designing a bioreactor to deliver protein efficiently to humans, you wouldn't use an animal for it. You asked, why, and there's a number of different metrics, and feed conversion ratio is the most obvious metric. And you track the sun all the way why that is inefficient. But you asked why it mattered. The reason it matters is because there's no way with a $7 billion human population going to 9 billion that we can feed the world if you keep using animals as a source of protein. They require too much land, and the cost is too high. And today it might seem like it isn't, but in the future that will all change. And so I think you just need more efficient sources of protein to feed the world in the future. And that's why it matters. I always found it ridiculous that companies have billions of dollars going into products that are meant to feed animals when there's billions of people in the world doing it. Mm-hmm. So that is the most obvious reason why, to me, all this matters.
Amol, you're invested in Beyond Meat, which is one of the companies people always list when they're doing stories about protein alternatives and alternative sources of protein. So can you kind of just fill in the audience a little bit about how they're doing as a company? You know, how big are they at this point? How much market traction do you feel like they've got? What are they learning about this market?
Well, you know, you should talk about them. I wish they could have made it. They're the entrepreneurs that have taken all the risks. They deserve to communicate to you. But what I can tell you is they're having plenty of success, and more than we would have ever expected when we first invested. And it was controversial when we first invested, you can imagine. This was a number of years ago. Josh probably remembers that we were the first ones to jump into that bandwagon saying, you know, look, this is a problem that really needs to be solved. So, you know, you should talk to Ethan Brown and Brent Taylor. They've really taken on plenty of risks, just like Josh and the other entrepreneurs have, and they've come a really long way.
I think they might still have a distance to go. I went into a Whole Foods here in San Francisco, just a little anecdote, a place where you might expect them to sort of be on the front lines and having this stuff, and I said, you guys have any Beyond Meat? And they said, yeah, I think we have a box of it, you know, it might be in the back room, and they kind of went and checked, and they said, yeah, we have a box of it, but it's still frozen, and it might take a couple days to thaw out, and so can you come back next Tuesday? And I just felt like, this was only about a year ago. So the supply chain doesn't seem like it's been completely smoothed out yet.
Yeah, and it won't be for a long time. And this is one of the challenges that any new innovative companies in this space are going to face, is that not everybody is convinced of this dynamic of change as all of us are, maybe, who are sitting on this panel. So it'll be a while before it's as smooth as it is for Tyson Foods or some other player in the meat space who already has pre-existing distribution relationships or relationships with grocers. So it doesn't happen overnight, but each passing month you get better and better at it.
Okay. What do we have here in this jar?
So these guys, I mean, what we're doing at Tiny Farms basically is figuring out like how to produce insect protein more efficiently, and we're helping people who are trying to do it well. But one of the other things we're looking at is like what other sources of protein are there in the insect world that aren't being exploited. Right now, people are focused on crickets and mealworms. Those are really easy to keep, and there's a lot of sort of knowledge there. There's not that much, honestly, but that's what the industry's been using going forward. But these guys here are a species of cockroach. They're tropical in origin. They can't survive outside of controlled conditions like 80 degrees Fahrenheit and high humidity. But these guys are sort of pretty big. You can't really see in here, but they're kind of like a shrimp that lives on land, and it tastes like chicken. And I mean, that sounds pretty compelling to me right away. But then if you look, there are also these problems, like they're not as easy to cook as shrimp, and they're kind of like, obviously there's a big cultural barrier to eating cockroaches in the US. But there's a massive number of species of insect which are edible, and we've barely scraped the surface. And then we're not even talking about domestication. I mean, the animals that we eat, like cattle that are raised for meat, are unrecognizable from what they were originally. So if you can like domesticate insects in a pretty long time frame, we're talking, like there's going to be this explosion of different types of protein and massively more efficient things than we've ever seen before. So this is like a little box of cockroaches, but it could be a big deal.
You guys can't see them, but they look like they're about 3 inches long. They're huge.
Yeah, they're a couple of inches long, these guys. They're amazing. They like give live birth. They'll like, they have this sort of life cycle where they give birth to little live roaches that will like swarm around, eat kind of fruits and vegetables basically we feed them. And then they grow to a certain size, they become big and juicy, and that's when you harvest them, because after that they'll grow wings suddenly, and they look completely different. So.
And I think it's important in thinking about animal protein. Animal protein isn't just that which we experience directly, like chicken, like beef. Animal protein, intensive animal farming also lives in other products too. It could live in a muffin, it could live in a cookie, it could live in a protein bar as whey. And often, for someone like my dad, for example, or you're not eating a cookie or a muffin or a protein bar that has whey because you're just obsessed with eating that animal. You just want to have a cookie or a muffin or that protein bar. And I think finding ways around this animal protein conundrum is also thinking about where it's living to and finding clever ways of getting at that. And I just got to say, because my dad actually was just here, and I know our recruiting director's there too. Hi, Morgan. She actually made Beyond Meat for my dad, who is the most impossible person to convince of anything. He doesn't give a damn about animal welfare or environmental sustainability, even though I love him. And he ate it, and he was like, "I'd eat this. I love it. It tastes really good." And I think we solve the problem when we get at people, maybe unlike a lot of us, who simply aren't thinking about this stuff. That's mainstream. When I was raised in Birmingham, Alabama, people in Birmingham, Alabama, for the most part, many of my friends aren't thinking about where their food is coming from. And if we can find a way to make the food that they're eating significantly more affordable and tasting the same or even better, I think that's where we really begin to have a true impact.
Okay, so if I could rephrase that, you're saying that if you hide the non-animal protein in the form of the egg substitute in a cookie or the insect flour in a muffin, then it's going to win much faster acceptance.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's going to win much faster acceptance when you do that, certainly, but also when we find ways of being significantly more affordable than the current animal product. I mean, again, my dad, if we can give him plant-based chicken that is more affordable than the real chicken, I say that in quotes because the chicken stuff with antibiotics and all this stuff it's controversial whether it's actually real or not. But, you know, my dad begins to choose that plant-based chicken that's more affordable.
Okay. Let's maybe come back to the price question. I think that's a really important, interesting question. But, you know, when Dan was holding up the cockroaches here, I kind of felt myself squirming a little bit. Probably a lot of you were too. And, you know, so we're talking about taking forms of protein that are unfamiliar and a little bit icky, I think, and trying to get over these, like Gabby said, this irrational disgust. And so I just want to lay that out on the table. So how do you convince people from Western cultures that just are not used to eating insects? How do you get them over that psychological hurdle? And you know, it's not closely related to that. It's this question of how you convince people who are just used to eating meat as part of their way of life, or eggs, or other animal products, to try something different when, you know, there's nothing wrong with it from their perspective. Their family and their ancestors have been doing it for generations. So it's not necessarily a disgust issue, it's just like a cultural issue.
So I think that question seems pretty pressing to us because we live in America. But maybe it's not even the right question to ask, because if you look across the planet, more people eat insects than don't. And so the question really is, if we're looking for the lever which we can move the world with, maybe if we can increase the efficiency of something that's already happening, then that's how we bring about this huge change. And then maybe that change is going to like trickle across into our culture. And I think there's a lot of legitimacy to like encouraging Americans to experience this stuff and like sort of change people's mindsets, but it's going to happen slowly. And I think the big lever is going to places where it already happens and helping them do it better.
Yeah, just to add to that, there are some interesting historical case studies. So sushi, for example, in the 60s, most of us thought was pretty disgusting. Then a chef in LA replaced the fatty tuna with avocado, turned it inside out, created the California roll. And now most of us love sushi. So in the same way, we're taking cricket flour, combining it with natural, normal ingredients, and basically trying to create the California roll of insects. So there are ways of shifting perceptions that have happened historically.
And your plan, you were telling me earlier, your plan is to eventually offer a pure insect flour, right, that isn't kind of mixed with the nut stuff.
Yeah, of course. So our ultimate goal is to offer this protein powder, which is very healthy, very nutritious, and ultimately very cheap. And the protein bars is just the initial vehicle for that protein powder.
Okay. So what about on the sort of the plant side? How do you make a plant-based protein palatable? How do you convince people that it's you know, a perfectly good substitute for the good old eggs they've been using forever?
So hopefully, in our case, most of the time, there's no convincing because they're just having mayo or cookies or muffins, lots of products where a third of the 79 billion eggs that come from battery cage facilities in the US live. And then these products are more affordable if the food manufacturers want to pass those savings on. Maybe they don't, but you know, when we talk to a large Fortune 500 food company, like a General Mills, like a Heinz, like a Kellogg's, you know, I care about sustainability personally. I care about water, I care about animal welfare. They tend to care a lot about it being more affordable. Now, some folks in those companies do care about those things, and I think that's important and that's notable. But you know, for consumers that we work with those products that eggs live inside, we don't even want to get in a conversation about it. Because my dad's not, again, eating mayo because he loves eggs or cookies because he loves eggs. Now, we do have something that's about 6 months away called Just Scramble, where we've identified a particular plant. We can throw it in a pan and it scrambles up, and you guys can check out a video at our booth when the session ends. That's going to be more difficult because you're actually experiencing it directly. It is obviously, it's not an egg, it's made from a plant, but I think we'll end up winning there, most importantly, because it'll be 20% more affordable. And think of someone like my dad who doesn't care about all these sustainability issues. He's looking for the most affordable choice, especially if that affordable choice tastes the same. So we're very consumed with the idea of always being less expensive than the better.
Okay. Last time I checked, you could get a pound of tofu at Safeway for like $1.29, which is a lot cheaper than beef, right?
Yeah.
So why aren't people using using tofu in their stir fry and their barbecue instead of steak?
Well, for the most part, tofu doesn't taste good. That's probably the biggest reason.
All right.
Yeah, and then habit is another one.
Okay, that's an important factor too. That's all I'm saying, really. Just, you have to talk people out of the things they've always been doing. Whether you're talking about guns, right, or meat.
I think it's difficult to come at people saying, like, I'm going to replace something that you do. Like, to begin with, that's kind of a confrontational thing. And, like, it sounds like the products you're making are really fantastic, but I'm sure there's going to be that difficulty of getting me to buy a carton of egg liquid instead of a box of eggs.
Would you buy some cookies, though?
I would, yeah, and I think as a consumer, that's what makes sense. Like when you're having constituents of foods that you didn't even know were in there to begin with replaced, and you're saving money. That's where this stuff becomes really compelling. But it's really difficult. Like I'm not going to walk into the supermarket and tell somebody they're going to be eating these cockroaches instead of their chicken. But if you can do stuff like augment the protein content of foods using insect protein as a new kind of feedstock, then we're talking something different.
Scott, you guys invested in Hampton Creek. So can you talk a little bit about what it was that attracted you to Josh and his company and why you think this is like one of those potential future monopolies?
Yep, so I think the thing that was unique about what they're doing is, one framing we always put on stuff is, how is this more for less? So actually a better product for less money. And in a way that's not going to get consumer resistance. So by partnering with larger food manufacturers, you put this product in other products, and it's just seamless to the consumer, lower cost, and at the same time can be 10x better on an important metric of animal cruelty. So a lot of people are not going to say no to that. I think that's one of the framings we use is it 10x better, an order of magnitude better on some important metric, and is it lower cost? And so it satisfied both of those. I think obviously what they're doing is good for the world, and on top of that, it's a hard engineering problem. You guys have done a lot of work on figuring out here's the plant proteins that can actually effectively replace eggs, and we believe with the team they have that they can pretty much stay ahead of it. So that they do have a technological barrier to entry.
Okay. Amol, would you use the same type of criteria when you're looking at a potential food-related or protein-related investment? And do you think that company has to be extra special smart to be able to overcome some of the barriers we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to have a fundamental technical innovation, which innovations like Josh's, could do. And I think cost does matter. There's a long history of the relationship in price elasticity. If you look at broiler chicken, for instance, broiler chicken in the U.S. was 8 or 10 pounds per capita 60 or 70 years ago, and something like 70 or 80 pounds per capita now. And the primary reason for that is animal husbandry and what they've done to drive the cost of chicken down. So price does matter, and you either need to have a competitive advantage on cost or price, or you need to have a pathway to get there. Otherwise, it's going to be hard pressed to be mainstream.
So I've got one more question for each of you guys, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So a lot of the folks here are probably either already starting food-related businesses or are wondering how to get into the food-related industries and how to turn their own ideas into companies. So can you extrapolate from what you're learning and as entrepreneurs into a little crystallized piece of advice for these people? What would be the one thing you'd say to anyone who wanted to start a food-related company? Gabby, do you want to
Sure.
start?
I mean, first of all, honestly, as a 23-year-old just launched a Kickstarter, probably the least qualified to offer this advice and most in need of it. But that said, one big thing that's been helpful is we worried a lot initially about making sure everything was perfect. So the recipe, the branding, everything. And we could have just gone straight to market and got a lot of feedback. We worried about unnecessary things. So I just recommend getting something out there and seeing what people think.
Okay, fail early.
Yep.
Yep, cool.
I think, yeah, it's important to remember that if you're working in the food space, you're not building a software product. You're not going to like whack up a website and have like scaling problems next week. And so if you got the inkling of an idea, like you need to get going as soon as possible with figuring it out, debugging it. It's a bit of a
So to speak.
Exactly. So like, if you're thinking insects may be the way forward and you're going to be able to build a bug farm to help these guys scale their business, then like talk to us and we can sell you the stuff to help make that happen. And we can like help introduce you to the industry and like dig in as fast as you can, because like this stuff, it moves fast in some respects, but it is a slow moving thing, like developing products that require like chemistry and cooking and like supply chain stuff. That's a big deal. So like get going as soon as you can.
In addition to that, I would say one key thing I would add is what are you doing that others can't just copy or can't just do easily? Because if you want to have any pricing power over the long term, you need to be doing something that no one else can just come along and compete on price. So, you know, there's a few ways that you get these barriers to entry. Maybe in the food space especially, you have things like brand and scale and technology. And I think the most powerful one is probably technology. So think about what innovations have you actually made that others can, or that you'll do better than they will.
Great.
I would say you should resist the temptation to think small. And you know, a lot of, I think, people in the agriculture or food sector, sometimes they have very worthwhile aspirations, but you should think about the global impact of what it is you're doing, and always remember that, you know, as a vision for the company. So thinking big has a lot of merit, and making sure you're never thinking small is a lot of merit.
Yeah, and I'd say if you're not going after the idea of taking down animal agriculture, you should think again and pursue that as an approach, because I think there's so much room for innovation, there's so much room for disruption, and the idea of not thinking small, of realizing we got one time on this planet, and animal agriculture is connected to the fostering of so many of these problems that we care about every single day. Secondly, I'd say read the Lean Startup, which relates to rapid prototyping, which relates to getting your stuff out there. And then third, maybe have your first intern or fellow be someone who's very focused on recruiting, and get lots of very, very smart people to work for you for just a little bit of money, or hopefully for nothing. And even if you don't have a science background, like I don't at all, realize that that's not a barrier, that you can hire really smart people. You can reach out to the smartest people in the world and ask for a little bit of help as a way to get you off the ground and going.
Can you go home to Alabama and talk about what you do?
Yeah, I can, because they, you know, I always say we're a success when we're dominating the Piggly Wiggly in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah.
And I think the folks in Birmingham, Alabama care about cheap, really cheap, good food. And when I talk about really cheap, good food in Birmingham, I usually get some head nods, and when I, you know, talk about over like an Alabama-Auburn game, they're even more excited too. Anytime college football is involved, it's good.
So thanks, guys. This has been a great discussion so far. We're gonna just throw it open for Q&A. So raise your hand, and I'll pick people, and I'll try and be fair. And we've got at least 15 minutes, maybe more. So who wants to jump in? Back there? Yep.
In the 1960s, there was a development of a product that eventually became known as mycoprotein. And it was a very popular product, or remains a very popular product in the UK, but it never became mainstream. It was mostly adopted by the vegetarian community. Highly efficient from an energy perspective, had good texture, good flavor, etc. What was the hindrance to the adoption of mycoprotein even to today, on a sort of, you know, global basis? And what's going to be different today? When we thought we had a food crisis then, we think we're going to face a food crisis today. They developed a miracle food, and it never went mainstream. So what's going to be different today, and with the products that we're talking about today, relative to the mycoprotein story?
So I think mycoprotein, if I remember correctly, like corn is the big product in the UK. That isn't allowed to be sold in the US. I think there's like...
No, there's not.
We
Oh,
buy it
we buy it at Whole Foods.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
great.
so I'm
He's
wrong
a
on
guy.
that. But maybe that's a recent thing then, but I'm sure there was some kind of regulatory
So
obstacle.
it's been around for 20 years in the US, but never went mainstream. Delicious, good standards, good rating when you look at all the rating things that are done by food critics, etc. But no one adopted it. And it's the super efficient, super cheap source of vegetarian protein. The big question has always been, why won't these alternative protein sources go mainstream? And we've gone through this story before, and a lot of people forget the mycoprotein story. When in the late 60s we thought we were facing a food crisis, this was the solution, and it never worked.
I think people just care more nowadays. So you've got the fine dining world, you've got top chefs in Nolan, Copenhagen, for example, experimenting with insects. You've got top chefs pushing farm-to-table cuisine, and people are just way more information about where your food comes from and about farming in general. So I think people just care more.
So I like corn's products, especially those that don't contain eggs, although some do. But my dad definitely doesn't. And my dad doesn't because they don't taste like his chicken. They're good, but they're more expensive, and they don't taste close enough to his chicken. And I think that's the biggest barrier to enabling the mainstream to adopt it.
Is corn expensive? I haven't
Yes.
tried it. It is?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is just, I'm just guessing here, but it sounds like corn was being developed at exactly the same time when the Green Revolution was really starting to kick in, and like the
Yeah.
price
They were replaced with cheap wheat.
Exactly. So it's exactly the same situation that alternative energy is in now. There's no way to, grow wind and solar as long as natural gas and oil are so cheap and without huge subsidies, right? So I don't know.
Are we going to find it similarly difficult in some of the foods that you guys are producing on a cost per gram of protein basis? Is there any alternative that's going to make this economic model any different? So let's say we take the affordability question out of it. I'm sorry, is that the objective, I guess, of a lot of the protein-based food startups nowadays? Is to try and get the cost per gram of protein down to a point
Yes,
where you can actually...
it has to be, but that has to be the goal. But I think that consumers don't yet purchase based on the cost of gram of protein. And I think that education shift, I think someone referred to information, I think the accessibility of information will help that transformation. But I think that absolutely has to be the goal. And I think scalable manufacturing, these new technologies, as companies scale, their supply chains get more mature. Animal protein companies have 6 or 7% gross margins. Not suggesting that companies in this sector should drop to that level, but you can become highly efficient, drop the cost, and get to a point where it can be affordable.
But they also have highly subsidized input costs. So aren't we going to face a challenge with some of the alternatives?
They do. They definitely have. So take the industry, definitely highly subsidized input costs, soy and corn, but they sure have a lot of input costs. Right. So part of the reason why we're almost 2 years old. Okay. Right now, we're able to be 20% more affordable at 50% margins than battery cage eggs are for a company like General Mills. Right now. Not tomorrow, not 10 years from now. Right now, and it's kind of simple logic. We are looking at plants, not a whole lot of them, just a few of them, growing them, lightly processing them, and plants are amazing in their functionality if you're doing it right.